Today we're going to transition. You're probably not going to notice the transition as much as I'm feeling the transition, but we're going to move from talking about our fears and insecurities and shame and guilt and how that all connects to the church, and if it does connect to the church, and who's behind all of our feelings and thoughts. And we're going to move into some biblical evidence for the fact that we, and when I say we, I don't mean you and I necessarily, I don't mean the church necessarily, I mean we as humanity, we as anyone who has endeavored to understand the Bible. I'm going to expose some things step by step to show you that even the way the Bible is translated from its original language to English and any other language it's translated to is done with bias that twists the story that God's trying to tell. Bottom line, the story God is telling us is far better than anything I could express, even trying to do it right, because I'm biased and I'm broken and I'm not able to understand as I should. But I'm going to share with you the journey I've been on, the things I've discovered, because I truly believe that if you could start to see God the way I'm starting to see him, the fear, the shame, the guilt, the disconnect from church, all of those things will start to just go away. So let me list a couple of things that we're going to cover in this video and future videos that are huge, that we just thought we knew, that we had no idea about. So that sounds really vague. So let me get specific. The story of the prodigal son. You know the story, right? Jesus tells the story of a father. He had two sons. One son says, I don't want to be here anymore. Just cut me my check. The inheritance I would have gotten when you died, just let me go. And he goes and he wastes it all. And then there's a famine. He ends up feeding pigs for some farmer. He's destitute and hungry and miserable. He decides when he comes to his senses, I'm going home. Even if I have to be a servant in my father's house, I'm going home. So he makes up a big speech. Dad, I'm not worthy to be your son. I'll be your servant. And he goes home. And then the father sees him a long way off. He runs. I'm not going to tell the rest of the story. What I'm going to tell you is that story that Jesus told is not even really about that son. Like, focusing on that son as the center of the story misses the story entirely, almost entirely. Secondly, and this one is huge, we have, if you go to church, it's probably up on the wall in your church somewhere. If not, you've seen it, depending on what country you live in, what culture is around you. But everyone, regardless of whether they're religious or not religious, has heard of the 10 Commandments. 2 tablets of stone. I think usually I have 4 written on one and 6 written on the other. I'm here to tell you that in the Bible, there is no such thing as 10 Commandments. It doesn't exist. You say, you've lost your mind. The 2 tablets of stone exist. The 10 things that God said exist. But 10 Commandments, though that document and what God was sharing are not connected with that term, 10 Commandments. So it's going to take a couple videos at least to break that down. Let's back up to what I shared with you about Abraham and Sarah a few videos back. So Abraham and Sarah predate the 10 Commandments. They came 400 years later-ish. Abraham and Sarah, ordinary couple, except they couldn't have children. Now, what sense does it make from any perspective, God's perspective or a human perspective, to choose a couple that can't have children to be the couple that becomes the nation, family, then nation, that blesses the whole world? How's that going to work? So God takes a couple who can't produce, literally, and uses them as the beginning of the family through which Jesus is going to come and the family through which he's going to bless the world. All the nations. You say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Precisely. You see, and there's nothing wrong with it, we gravitate towards things that make sense. We like resolution. We like, if I introduced a problem to you at the beginning of a video, you want it to come to some kind of resolution at the end. you watch a movie and there's some kind of problem, and then at the end it comes to a resolution. A TV show, the same thing. A book you read, the same thing. We want to go from problem to solution and have it all make sense in the end. We don't mind if there's a little bit of confusion. In fact, we kind of like the part where, it's like, oh, this can't possibly work out. And then it does. But God's story is entirely different. God purposely begins with the impossible to demonstrate who he is, what he's about, what he can do, and what we can count on if we choose him. So he starts with Abraham and Sarah. Can't have children. 75 years old Abraham is when God comes and says, listen, you've been trying this for a while. It's not working. So let me come to you on your point of need. You want a child. I can do that. But in exchange for that, I want you to come with me. Now, you might feel like there's an element of, you do this for me and I'll do this for you. But you're going to see in the end that what God wants from Abraham is not for God's benefit, it's for Abraham's benefit. So God's like, hey, I'll do something for your benefit so that you can do something else for your benefit. Because he loves us. Everything he does is for our benefit. So he comes, he makes the covenant with Abraham, that's what we call it, and their journey together begins. So he moves, as God instructed, from his home in Haran down to the land of Canaan. Doesn't know really where he's going, doesn't know exactly what God's point is in all this. He just goes. Therein is a lesson, which we will get to as we go. But part of serving God, the biggest part of embracing God, is learning to follow him, especially when it makes no sense. So, if you think of this from a logical, analytical point of view, like, God, what difference does it make if I live in Haran with Sarah or if I live in Canaan with Sarah? Like, if you can give me a child, just give me a child. It's not logical. But God asks him to do it because the submission to God is where the benefit and blessing start to come. How do we find out what he's like? How do we find out anything more about him? How do we build a relationship with him if we're constantly doing things our way and being where we want to be and doing what we want to do? Like, no relationship works that way. Husband, wife, parents, children, boss, employee, like, nothing works that way. There's always give and take. There's always, you need to do this, whatever. But in God's perspective, what he is inviting us into is a rediscovery of who he is. So if you'll remember, this mess all started with the serpent telling Eve that God wasn't who he said he was. And as a result of that lie and the fallout from it, God is now trying to, one by one, call us back to himself and reintroduce himself to us. So in the video I did on Abraham and Sarah, you saw that Abraham took the promise, I will give you a son. You'll be the father of a great nation. He took the promise, went to Canaan, but over time reframed the promise as pressure. Like, we have to have a son. At all costs, we got to get this done. And so as time passed and nothing was happening, Abraham eventually told God, listen, you're not keeping up your end of the deal. I'm going to adopt. Like, if you can't do what you said you're going to do, then I'm going to do it. God settled him down, and the journey continued. There's about a decade between the promise and that moment, and then more time passed. Eventually, Sarah, feeling the pressure of nothing happening, offers Hagar as a surrogate / concubine / second wife, a woman to have a child with. And Abraham takes it, takes the offer. Shouldn't have, but he's feeling the pressure. They're both feeling the pressure. But there is no pressure. That's the thing. The only place there's pressure is in their thinking. You say, well, they're not having children. No, they're not having children. But God said that they would. Therefore, there's no pressure if we believe what he says. As soon as we doubt what he says, there's immense pressure. So Eve and Adam went and hid themselves, even though they'd made up some kind of clothing, they went and hid themselves because they no longer saw God as someone safe to bring themselves to when they were in trouble. They'd never been in trouble, and there was this divide between them, this invisible wall, and they were hiding. But all of that invisible wall and the divide between them, that's all in their mind. At no point did God say, if you go to that tree, you can't come back to me. He never said that. And when Jesus was here, he said, anyone who comes to me, I will not cast away. Anyone, which demolishes in one statement the whole Calvinism thing we talked about. Don't ever let anyone convince you that somehow you're a black sheep and you can't come. Anyone who comes, I will never cast away. So either we take God at his word, which are promises, or we see the promise, what is supposed to come, in this case a child, and we take it on as pressure. I must produce a child. God never came and said, Abraham, you must move to Canaan and produce a child. No, he said, I will give you a child, you move to Canaan. So God gives us things to do in life. He calls us to places. He asks us to do this and that and the other thing. None of that is for payment to him. None of it is even for his benefit. It's to enter into a relationship with him and discover through the journey how good he is. But we often, if not always, take those promises and turn them into pressure. Now, maybe at this point you can see where this is going. I'm going to drop this bomb on you and the video is going to end and you'll have to come back for the next one. I'm not doing that on purpose. It's like eating meals or doing exercise or anything. You can only do so much at a time. What we call the 10 Commandments, the Bible never calls the 10 Commandments. You'll look it up in the English and say, oh yeah, it's right here, it's right here. Yeah, but if you looked it up in the original, you wouldn't find it. You can even look it up in the English and see plenty of evidence that what I'm telling you is true. Not only is it true, you're going to see that it fits the theme of what we've been talking about. It fits the theme of the whole story. So God calls slaves, helpless slaves, owned by the Egyptians. He frees them by his power. They follow him out of Egypt through the Red Sea, which he opens and closes by his power. Brings them to the other side. Now they're safe. No one's chasing them. Everything's calm and chill. They have some other smaller issues. God deals with those. Every time there's an issue, God resolves it. And all through that up and down of problems and resolutions, they're feeling the pressure as if their survival and success is on them. But they didn't initiate the journey. They didn't start the plan. They didn't devise any of it. God just said, I'm going to do this thing. I'm inviting you to come with me. And it wasn't just the Israelites that went. There were Egyptians who, in Egypt, as the plagues and all that were happening, they embraced the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and they came with the Israelites. Again, anyone who wants to come can come. So they come through the Red Sea, other side, issues with water and food and whatever. Anyway, he brings them to Sinai. And at Sinai, he says he's going to meet with them. He speaks. Exodus 20 is actually verbal. That's not where the tablets come from. They come later. The 2 tables of stone. He speaks from Sinai. And I'm telling you right now, what he spoke were not commandments to be obeyed. They were promises made. Period. God spoke from Sinai to freed slaves, and he said, these are the things that I'm going to do for you. Let me give you one piece of incontrovertible, undeniable evidence to show you how the story has gotten majorly twisted. I challenge you to go find, and we'll put a bunch of pictures up here as the video goes. I'm going to show you, and I challenge you to go look yourself. on Google Images, anywhere you want. Pictures of the 10 Commandments. And without fail, they will all start with, you shall have no other gods before me. But that's not the beginning of what God said. Now think about that. We only have one place in Scripture, in the Old Testament, where God assembled a mass of people and said, I'm going to speak to you from heaven. Then I'm going to write down what I said to you, so you'll have it in hard copy. I'm going to give it to Moses. There's no other place like that. It's the only hand copy we have of anything that came directly from the mouth of God. But if you go find any of the copies that we've made, the computer images, the stone images we've made ourselves, wood, whatever format, the beginning is cut off. Who in their right mind would edit what God spoke? Like, it's only brief. Why would we even need to mess with it? But we did. We took the beginning and we just cut it off and threw it away. Like it never happened. He began this way. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. I am God. Look at what I've done for you. Here's what I'm going to do for you. They're promises. End of story. This is not a Seventh-day Adventist issue. This is not a Roman Catholic issue. This is not a Jehovah's Witness issue. This is not a Baptist issue. This is not a Christianity issue. This is anyone who's ever read the Bible issue. This is translating issues. This is humans taking what God has given as a promise, flipping it around into pressure, and rewriting the story according to our messed up perspective. When you get this, and we're going to break it down, when you get this, your issues of I can't go back to church because this, or I can't come back to God because of this, or I can't because, and I need to do this first and that, it will all melt away. Because the story is not based on us under pressure getting stuff right to some kind of a point before we can come to God. That is not the story. It's never been the story. And as we continue through this journey, we are going to find a God who says, listen, I see you. I hear you. I know where you are. I know where you've been. I know everything. Just come to me. Follow me. Give me a shot and see what I can do. We'll see you next time.